Welcome to the Woo and Science Podcast, episode 3. Today we're talking about mind over multiple chemical sensitivities, brain and emotions, and chemical sensitivity recovery. We'll be back in a second to go deeper.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Woo and Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Michael Longyear. This is my wife, Dr. Meaghan Longyear, and we practice in Jacksonville, Florida. We have what I would call a brain-based practice, and because we go after the brain and nervous system first in a lot of things, and we have a different kind of almost say opposite approach to how we look at these things. And so we thought it would be interesting because this is a topic, especially the multiple chemical sensitivities, that is huge right now, and I think it's something that we need to shine a light on. And I think our approach is considerably different than what I've heard a lot of people doing and what a lot of our patients come to us for. We've had a lot of patients have been to us, they've been everywhere else already, and so when they've been everywhere, they've had a lot of the elimination diets, they've done the detoxes, they've done this, they've done that. And not that those things aren't beneficial, but I think we take a different approach to how we look at this. If you've caught some of our other podcasts, our most recent one, our second podcast was on the autonomic nervous system and the dysautonomia in POTS. But I want to jump off of that, some of the information that we covered, because the idea of sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight and flight, versus our rest, digest, and rebuild system. The parasympathetic nervous system is what allows us to rest, digest, and rebuild. And it's important to address this in multiple chemical sensitivities for this reason. When we talk about rest, digest, and rebuild, we're talking about the ability of the body to metabolize things. Everything in our world is metabolized. And what that means is we use everything for energy. Our relationships are actually broken down and used as energy. The food we eat is broken down and used as energy. The air we breathe is utilized for energy. And our parasympathetic nervous system needs to be engaged to be able to do that. And one of the things that it does is it creates what are called mucosal linings, meaning it like the mucus inside the nose or the mucus inside the gut lining. And those are really important because they're barriers and they're boundaries to keep the outside world out, but they're also barriers and boundaries that are part of how we metabolize all of that stuff, right? So when we look at this system, that parasympathetic nervous system needs to be functioning really well, because if it's not, and you don't have a mucosal lining, and now you're breathing something into the nose without that mucus to be as a barrier and allow for immune response, that can become a stressor to the system now, or your system won't be able to fight it. It'll be more apt to try to attack it because it looks at it as a foreign invader as opposed to something that your system can just kind of handle. So when we look at this system, I don't want you to avoid everything for the rest of your life, right? Because you could, right? I've had patients that came in, she called herself an aeritarian because every food she ate when we started with her caused her to bloat and blow up. And she couldn't eat anything. She was literally eating, like, her only food source or source of sustenance was a bag of powder that was like this meal replacement. It was the only thing that didn't make her blow up. And that's no way to live. I love it when a patient's goal is to be able to eat a cheeseburger. And so when she ate a cheeseburger for the first time and we got the picture of her doing that, that was an amazing experience, right? So when we're fighting everything or when our system is really wound up, everything can become a stressor to our system.
Absolutely. And like Dr. Mike was talking about, the feeling of attack, the system feels like it needs to attack when things come in. We look at that from an emotional perspective too, because if you've watched some of our other podcasts, how we go into talking about that limbic brain, and if we're perceiving our world and everything on the outside as something that's going to hurt the inside and make us feel bad, whether we're bloating, we're having a high heart rate, we have gut disturbances, constipation, diarrhea, fill in the blanks of all the different things that could result, we're looking at it from a fear-based place. So whereas we utilize a bunch of different things in here to look at the person, because each person that presents is going to be different, but a lot of that stems back to our emotional view of what our world looks like. and releasing some of that fear, getting us out of that fear place that eating celery is going to cause this, whereas it may have one time. Now we've created a nervousness around this that I don't want that to happen again, so I'm going to stay away from it, and only allowing ourselves to eat certain things. Like he was mentioning about that one patient, then you get to the point where you can't eat anything. The fear overtakes you, and now your whole system just looks at everything as danger. We have to get out of that limbic windup, that limbic loop, that there's danger, that everything I'm putting in my mouth that's nutrients that I need to eat to survive is actually something that's beneficial and my body can take and utilize as energy in an appropriate way. We utilize other techniques as well, an allergy elimination technique, to help create balance in the system with these in conjunction to working on that emotional brain. Because yes, your system can create autoimmune disorders and sensitivities to different things, and we need to create those healthy boundaries in the body. So we need to be able to eliminate that from a chemical standpoint, but we definitely need to be looking at the way that we're perceiving our world is a huge piece in how it's affecting our inside.
Yeah, and once we can cut down some of that perception problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a good place to just jump in of what the brain actually does. It's very complex, and there's a lot of wiring, and you can go down rabbit holes for years. Trust me, I have, in how the brain connects and all the different pathways. But at the end of the day, your brain really has three jobs. It has to perceive the environment around it. It has to process that information or understand it, so to speak. And then it has to form a response to that. Now, responses can be movements, they can be mobilizing your immune system, right, to go attack this, or not mobilizing your immune system to not go attack it. Or it can be a thought, or it can be an emotion. And the brain can break down at any one of those points, right? And where I think the multiple chemical sensitivities really comes in is it's all three of those points. Is one, you might have, like Dr. Meg was saying, a previous experience with something that caused a reaction that now causes you to really worry about that. Mm-hmm. And when you get stuck in that worry, you end up more in that sympathetic system, or you have that sympathetic escape, which shuts down the parasympathetic, which then decreases your ability to process the information at the end of it. Mm-hmm. So you end up fighting all of these things. Your processing now, because of previous memories, is skewed. So now your motor response is skewed. And so you hyper respond with the immune system, or you hyper respond with, chemicals or other things. Really, like when we get into this, we're talking more about the adrenal glands or the thyroid, because those are things that a lot of people will wind up into when they have these chemical sensitivities. That's a driver for the thyroid. So now you can be hyper or hypothyroid. You can have these adrenal fatigue issues where we're driving because everything's a stressor. So your brain creates a chemical called cortisol to handle stress. When it does that for too long, now you burn out your adrenal glands. So you'll hear all of these different diagnoses, and nobody's maybe really looking at the big picture and saying, are there just too many stressors for them to deal with? Mm-hmm. Because when you're in that fight or flight, again, I hate to keep harping on this, everything can become a stressor because you lose the ability to process it. And it's like anything else. Like your immune system is your battle system, right? They're your warriors. They're meant to go out and fight things. But any battle, any military can be overcome if there's too many stressors or too many things to deal with.
With that, we get a lot of parents that'll ask when they bring their children in and say, why is my child having all these allergies and sensitivities to all these different things? They're just 1 year old. This doesn't make any sense. But that goes back to, the child may not have a lifelong, emotions that you're working on, at your age, or knowing stresses that you have with bills and jobs and all these kinds of things. But we pick up on that of people in our environment as well. So the people that we surround ourselves with, and not saying that, you're a bad parent or you're dealing with your stress in the best way you know how, but everybody feels the stress and the emotion of family members. If dad's got a big project due, I remember growing up, and when my dad would have a big project coming up, I remember feeling stressed. And I didn't have a clue what these blueprints meant that he had on the dining room table, but I could sense him so worked up and worried, and I've got to meet this deadline and everything. So that, of course, I grew up with allergies and foods I couldn't eat either that would make me break out in hives and stuff, because our environment isn't just the things like pollen and things like that, but it's the people that we're around too, then the emotions that we're picking up on. So again, another way that's ramping up that cortisol in a child's body. So, that's why doing these kinds of things together in a family, like we are all going to work on doing things to help keep our stress levels down, just affects how everybody can be more in a balanced place and not as reactive in their world. And the children pick up on that obviously as well too. And as early on as, growing in mom's womb. I was working with a patient the other day, and her mom had a car accident when she was like third trimester, second trimester. And she said when we were working through some of her emotional stress, how her mom said that in that trimester after the accident, well, it's just a fender bender, but she flipped. Mom could feel her move, a big jolt inside. So of course the baby, she didn't understand what was happening. She hasn't developed all of her, her brain at this point in cognition, but still that sense creates a memory into our body. And that was a jarring thing that startled her. So in that, the emotional stress, the things that we're feeling, it's not just taking in, physical things, physical chemicals, but the emotions, the people, the, environment that we're living in that can definitely create a lot of that imbalance as well.
And all of those little things chip away at your resilience. And,
Yes.
from the literature, going back into the womb, we know now that mom passes cortisol level on to baby. So if
Mhm.
mom's stressed out, baby's going to be stressed out. They're going to come out of the womb with a different cortisol level and a different ability to handle multiple stressors. And our world right now, we're harping on the stress, the emotional side of it right now, but our world is more stressful than it ever was.
Yes.
Regardless of, I was joking to say we can put our tinfoil hat on. When chiropractic was first around, our world was very physical. So the adjustment was enough to unwind the system and remove the interferences. And then this company called Monsanto came along, and they started altering the chemical makeup of some of our seeds and plants and those kind of things. And so the body started to recognize those things as foreign. And so then you had, functional medicine came around and was looking to address that problem. But all of those little stressors that we can't really get away from, you can't avoid everything in your world.
Mhm.
They chip away at what I refer to as the resilience of your nervous system. And that's where I would say our brain-based approach is meant to reprocess a lot of what you've gone through. You can't avoid all of it, but with the allergy elimination techniques and some of those things, we can reprocess or literally retrain your brain. And if you remember, retraining your brain is known as neuroplasticity. We can retrain your brain to better be in that rest, digest, and rebuild system, but we can also retrain it how to fight appropriate things as opposed to responding inappropriately. And it comes back to those three jobs of the brain. If we can retrain your brain what should be a stressor
Mhm.
versus what it understands right now as a stressor, then we can more appropriately have your system respond to the things around it and to the environment around it. So it's not about avoiding everything, because you
Mhm.
can't be an Eritrean and live in a bubble. Trust me, we've had patients who, when they came to us, were kind of in that place. We've got to retrain the resilience and build your brain back up, not
Mhm.
shut down signals. I would say that's maybe the biggest difference between allopathic medicine and natural medicine, or a more holistic approach to things. Is with medications and drugs, they're aimed at shutting down the signals, they're shutting down the symptoms. And where I would say our approach is we're actually turning the brain up. We're trying to turn the system up to better handle the environment through movement, through reprocessing things, reframing things, and reteaching or rewiring the brain on how to respond to those stressors.
Absolutely. So as we look at the person, whether that be a little child that comes in or somebody that's, more in a neurodegenerate kind of place, degeneration kind of place, it's looking at what you're dealing with, what's going on in your environment. How do we fire your brain up? The brain controls everything. Definitely we have to work on the gut and stuff like that, but the brain controls everything. So we have to get that back online. That has to be strong. And same with the resilience.
And it's not to say those stressors aren't out there, right? Like mold
Sure.
is a problem. Mold stresses your system out.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of people walking around that don't have a reaction to mold.
Mhm.
And now we can dive into genetics, and that'll be another topic, right? The brain versus genetics, because, there's this boon on mapping the genetic genome. And well, my genetics say I can't handle mold, but you did for the beginning of your life and you were okay. And so I might argue with some of that stuff too. And there's as we get into some of this stuff, there's a great guy named Bruce Lipton who wrote the epigenetics. He wrote the biology of belief, and it's all about epigenetics and how we upregulate and downregulate our genes to be able to better process. So even if you're genetically unable to handle certain things, your body still was able to for a long time because it had more neuroresilience. It had the ability to handle those. The stressors hadn't added up to a point yet where they were starting to win the battle, right? Because when you're in that sympathetic or that fight or flight, if you're ready to fight everything, you're ready to fight everything, and you're always keyed into every little thing, right? And your brain remembers things. We were talking about this when we were coming in. When I take a deep breath in or when I sigh, it triggers her. Like I can put her, I know exactly how to put her into fight or flight. You can watch her pupils blow out. If I just go like that, see, her pupils got bigger. I don't know if you can see that on camera. You couldn't if you're listening to it, but I can trigger her instantly. And we know that's because when people sighed in the past, it was a big thing. Or when I sighed in the past, it was right before I got mad. So those triggers, those memories are a big part of that. And so smell is one of our it's most tied to memory, right? So smells, to the chemical sensitivity thing, if you smell a certain thing that maybe you got nauseous from in the past, or that maybe had a little bit of brain fog associated with it, your brain's really good in survival mode of tying a negative reaction to an environmental trigger. And when I say trigger, I don't necessarily mean a negative trigger, but like a stimulus. So it can be a smell, it can be a sound, it can be the way somebody breathes, it can be the way that they look. Right? Even body posture is a big trigger to put you into that sympathetic escape, because, most of our communication is nonverbal. Depending on what article you read, only 10% of the communication between us is verbal. The rest of it's nonverbal. So body postures, breathing, the way somebody looks at you, like facial features, those are all very triggering and can put you into that sympathetic escape, which then decreases your ability to understand your environment, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Think to like a cologne from an ex-boyfriend, or hearing a song that your first love and you dance to in your little grade school or high school place, how that can instantly make you go.
My brain just went to both of those.
Right? But people can understand that. But that's that survival brain. That was a bad time. You may be so happily married and in love with the person that you're with and would never go back to that person that you started. But that memory and that scent, that triggers so much. And it was interesting with a lot of the people that, we work with, as well as some of our own work that we've done and releasing some of those things. I actually got some of the cologne from my very first boyfriend, a smell, and it made me have that like just upset, like breakup feeling, and did some work around that. And it was amazing how now certain scents just don't affect me. It's like, oh, okay, I can remember that, but it doesn't control me. And that's where a lot of this stuff with the body reacting, like Dr. Mike was saying, with the attacking, that control, that part of the brain hijacks. And now we're into this stress place. So now if you start eating something after you've had a trigger in your memory, are you going to be processing that food? Are you going to be absorbing that food? Is your body going to look at that food as something good? Or is it going to take it and now limbically process that's something bad because of how you were stimulated? That's how deep some of this stuff can go that you don't think about consciously. It's just your brain doing what its job is, but we need to retrain it. We need to put it into more of a healthier pattern so that you're not looking at and being triggered by constantly things in your environment that we don't want to be negatively infected by.
Yeah, and because when you're negatively affected, again, if you remember the last one that we did, we talked about amygdala hijacking. When the amygdala ramps up, it shuts down our prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is what attaches us to others. It's what allows us to be social. It's what allows us to see the big picture and realize everything's going to be okay. To quote, I know one of Dr. Meg's favorites, Brene Brown, it's also what allows us to be vulnerable. It's what allows us to let others in, right? When we're like ready to fight, we're here, we're protecting, we're holding everything back. Our boundaries are such that we don't want to process anything. but we have to process the world around us because we have to metabolize that and use that as energy. So when we're in that kind of fighting everything, we're not able to take energy in, and that will deplete us in itself, right? We won't be able to metabolize things, make energy. So now we end up with more fatigue, we end up with more brain fog, we end up with more insert symptom here. But when we're vulnerable, when we're able to, lead with our heart, so to speak, allow others into our circle, allow chemicals, allow foods, allow those things in and process them in a healthy way, we can now use that as energy. Our brain can utilize all the oxygen, it can utilize all the other things, and it has enough energy or gas left in the tank to fight the things that we do need to fight. Because let's be honest, there are a ton of them out there. There are forever chemicals. There are perfumes and colognes that are more offensive than they were before. There are foods that are not foods that we're eating. There are all of these things. But the stronger and the more neuroresilient we are, the better we can handle and process those. Because at the end of the day, your liver's job is to detox your system and to flush all of that stuff. So with our approach, we look at optimizing those systems, not necessarily putting you in a bubble.
Absolutely. And like I kind of talked about earlier, how relationships and things like that can be a big piece. We have to look at the relationships of things that we can kind of be people that we're surrounding ourselves with. A lot of times patients will make comments about like how much they hate the people that they work with and they're miserable, and that's not helping your body be healthy. That's not helping your brain to be resilient. That's just depleting you, not being in an environment where you feel safe and being in a place. And I understand that there are some situations that it's, you can't just, leave certain people or whatever, but there's steps that you can take to maybe we can work on things to improve together. Let's, we can do things in the family together, try to become, a more solid unit. But sometimes looking into some of the relationships that you have in your environment, in your life too, and realizing that some of these relationships are pretty toxic and we're not working on things to make that less toxic, is something that, to take some time to kind of go inward and see, is this something that's beneficial to me in my health? Or is this something that's keeping me more in a fear-based place, that's keeping my limbic brain in a loop that's not healthy and not what I want? And now all the things that I'm eating, coming in contact with, doing in my life may not be is more in that big picture of positivity, but more in that negativity, more of that place that's keeping me in that sympathetic driven, that limbic loop, keeping my prefrontal cortex flattened out. We don't want to be in that place. So those are things that you can take to look at your own life and see while you do things to help your body clear these blocks out of the way so that you can be more neuroresilient and healthier.
So you're saying I just have to say no to some people every once in a while? I get yelled at for that all the time. I'm as guilty as anybody of kind of going in with both hands and so we need to just, sometimes there are things we need to detox from and eliminate from us. But for the most part, it's really about, again, I'm going to use that term, health is an active process. It's about engaging your brain, engaging your system, strengthening and building neuroresilience and building your brain's ability to handle the toxins that are out there so that you can more appropriately take in the things that you do need for energy. Because at the end of the day, guys, the elimination diets, they don't work because if you're in stress mode, your body is always going to respond to stressors. So you might, at one point, we ran blood work on her and she was allergic to spinach. You shouldn't be allergic to spinach, but it was what she was eating the most of while she was stressed. So we needed to build her resilience, and then she could eat spinach and not have a reaction, right? So it's about building that resilience. That health is an active process, and pruning away the things that we really don't need, that don't serve us, but ultimately engaging the brain, engaging the nervous system, and being the most optimal, best human being you can be. Thank you, guys. We will see you again next time.